computer. And we are recording, so this is Taste the
Okay,
Season
great.
with Susan Case of Sweet Wind Farm. Take it away.
Thanks. All right, you make a great news anchor. Thank you very much for having me. We live just up the road in East Heartland. My husband Arlo grew up in Granby. He was born, just locally, but he grew up his whole life in Granby, and he started making maple syrup when he was a little kid. And he did it with his parents right on Bushy Hill Road, and they called it Arlo's Sugar Shack. And so for many years, he made maple syrup with his parents right up until we were married, and then for a long time afterwards, until we found a place with some land up in East Heartland, and we knew we wanted to build a sugar house. So once we did, we started in 2006 making maple syrup up there, and we changed the name from Arlo's Sugar Shack to Sweet Wind Farm. And we've been making maple syrup for many years there. And so we make anywhere from 200 gallons to up to 1,000 gallons of syrup in a season, depending on the year, depending on how well the season goes. This past season, it was a pretty normal season. We usually sugar in February and March. And I think Holly is going to have me back during maple sugaring season to go over the whole entire process of how we make maple syrup. So I'm going to save most of that, all that stuff for sugaring season, which is usually, like I said, February and March here in Connecticut. And that's the only time of the year that we make maple syrup. But the rest of the year, we have it in storage. We have it bottled and canned, and we sell it in all different sizes. Like this is a quart, and we have it say Sweet Wind Farm right on the jug. And we have all different sizes from little ones all the way up to gallons. This is a pint. So a pint and a quart is like our most popular size for people. And we also have the glass bottles, which are really pretty. They're awesome for gifts, and then you can keep the bottle afterwards. And we even have little tiny nip bottles. This is just 50 milliliters of pure maple syrup in a little bottle, which is great for like if you're going to give for a gift, stocking stuffer or whatever. And then for some people who would rather have glass, we have the bigger glass. So maybe you guys can come attend again when I'm going to go over the whole process of maple sugaring. So really all I wanted to talk about this time of year is when you see the maple trees look beautiful, right? They turn these awesome colors of orange and yellow and sometimes a little bit of red, and all those beautiful colors can be on one leaf together. And so I collected some of these sugar maple leaves out of my yard today, and I'm just going to go over with you how you can identify a sugar maple. I always tell little kids who come to my class, like, just hold up your hand, and you can see like there's 5 points to this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 major points. And with a sugar maple, you can see that they kind of dip in like a U. And I'm going to compare to another leaf here that is another type of maple. This is called a swamp maple, and you can see a little bit of difference in the shape. And yes, one's big and one's smaller. That doesn't really matter as much. But if you look at the swamp maple, it has very jagged edges along the edge, like sawtooth, jagged edges on the edge. And the points in the middle are like V's. Whereas on a sugar maple, you can see it's more like a U. So maybe if you go and take a walk in the woods, or you're looking out the window, you can maybe start to identify the trees that are sugar maples. And there are lots of other types of maple trees around here in New England, though, like the swamp maple and red maple, silver maple, Norway maple. And we primarily tap trees that have a higher sugar content in the sap. So that would be sugar maples, black maples, and rock maples. So we stick to those because the sugar content is somewhere around 2.5% sugar content. And when you boil the sap and turn it into syrup, it ends up being about 66% sugar content. So we want it to be less watery. If you were to tap a swamp maple, you could make syrup out of it, but it has a lower sugar content, and also the buds tend to pop sooner on the trees in the springs, which ruins the sap. So we try to stay away from tapping swamp maples, but a lot of sugar makers do, especially if they have a reverse osmosis machine, which you can get out the water content a little faster and you don't have to boil as much. But we'll stick with the sugar maples. And today, I don't know about you, but I took a drive. I mean, I'm always driving my kids in the car somewhere. And just driving down the road, it's beautiful this time of year. It looks like a fireworks display everywhere. And people come from all over to New England to see the sugar maples. It's really the sugar maples that look the most beautiful. I mean, yes, the birches and the oaks and all the other kinds of trees turn, but it's really the sugar maples that will have just about all the different fall colors combined in one tree. I have few trees in our yard that they're everything. They're yellow, they're orange, they're red, all in one tree. So that was that. And maybe you can remember a little bit from school about why the trees turn color this time of year. But basically, they stop making chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is what turns the leaves green. So when the chlorophyll kind of drains away, it's the other pigments that were already there that are now showing up instead. And the tree kind of goes into a hibernation stage, and it stores its food in the form of starch, and it stores it in its roots. And all the leaves will fall off, and it kind of goes into a dormancy period. And then when late winter comes and you get those cold nights and then warmer days where you're getting a freeze and thaw cycle, it signals the tree to kind of wake up, and it takes the starch out of its roots and converts it into sugar and sends it up to its branches to try to start forming the buds to pop. So that's what happens for us during sugaring season. You actually can make maple syrup in the fall, but the sugar content won't be as high. But what happens is it freezes at night and thaws during the day, and it creates a pressure inside the tree. And as the tree drinks up water and it converts the starch into sugar, that pressure makes the sap flow. So we only get a sap flow on the days that has that perfect freeze and thaw temperature cycle. So we don't even get a sap run every single day during sugaring season. So it's a very short season. So it's about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So it's a ratio of 40 to 1. And it can take more than that if the tree sugar content isn't as high. So you can get different grades of syrup. Most of what we make is called medium amber. They changed the grading system. It used to be just called light, medium, and dark amber for grade A table syrup. And then what was called grade B, which is a darker, stronger flavored syrup, which is really good for cooking. But then I say they, but it's like the National Syrup Council decided to change the grading system and make it say it's grade A, delicate, and grade A, what's it called? It's called amber color, rich taste. And then the darker stuff is just called robust. And now grade B is not called grade B anymore. It's still called grade A, very robust. So we do make a little bit of grade B, which is really great for cooking and baking. But because the majority of the syrup that we make turns out to be medium amber, it's mostly what I use in our cooking. And I make all kinds of stuff. Like we make maple sugar candy, we make granulated maple sugar, maple jelly, maple cream, which is just 100% maple syrup that's been boiled down until it's thicker, and then it's whipped until it's like a really creamy texture. So we make all kinds of maple products out of our maple syrup. So today I was going to share with you a couple of recipes I have using maple syrup. And of course, it's also apple season. So we have a very small orchard at our farm, but it's enough for us to pick some apples and make some yummy stuff out of it. And I don't know if any of you have ever had apple butter before, but I'm going to talk about how to make apple butter with maple syrup. You can go to our website, which is at www.sweetwindfarm.net for recipes that I'm going to share with you today. You just go to that website and there's a special recipes page. And if you scroll down, I did put out the recipes for maple apple butter, maple pumpkin butter, and I'm also going to talk about how to do a maple caramel coated popcorn. So they're all on our website. I also put it on our Facebook page today. So if you want to look up those recipes, you can go to that. But maple apple butter is basically like applesauce sweetened with some maple syrup that has been cooked down until it's really super thick and pasty. So it's a spreadable consistency. Like the word butter is just a term that's used for a spread. So if you think about peanut butter, there's no butter in it, right? When you hear the word butter, you automatically think about dairy, like a stick of butter. But the word butter really stands for a spread. So peanut butter, apple butter, etc. It's very, very thick. So it's a lot thicker than applesauce. And you know what? I did not print my recipe so I could read it off to you in front of me. I guess I forgot to do that part. But if you can go to our website, you can see my steps and directions. But basically, use any kind of apple, and it's really good to mix up the varieties. Like we have a few different varieties of apples. This is ginger gold, and this is like a type of delicious. We have McCowan's and Cortland's. We have some Granny Smiths, and well, the Cortland's are really a really good apple all around, great for baking and for just fresh eating. Like the McCowan's are usually good for fresh eating. They're a little bit waterier, but if you mix up a different bunch of varieties, like I have a whole basket of apples here, the Macintosh too, those are really good. You just mix up the different varieties, and I think my recipe says about 5 pounds of apples. I never measure when I do my apple butter because I make such a big, huge kettle of it all together all at once. But basically, it's like 5 pounds of apples, and you're going to peel them and core them and put them in a big heavy bottom sauce pot. And I say heavy bottomed because usually the thin bottomed pots can burn very easily. So don't use one of those. Use one that has a thicker bottom or a copper bottom or something like that, so that it's not going to stick and burn. And you're going to need some apple cider. You could actually make your own apple cider if you have a juicer. Otherwise, just get some apple cider. I know there's a couple of local orchards right here in town that have apple cider. So about a quart of apple cider with your 5 pounds of cut up apples, and you're going to boil that down until the apples are soft. Now you can use just a typical peeler and a typical apple slicer. But what I do, because I do such big batches at a time, I don't want to be using a little peeler. I actually have one of these gizmos. This is called a Victorio apple peeler, and it has a suction cup that suctions to my counter, and it's a cute little gizmo that makes it really easy. You just put the apple right here, you pull back the spring, and you turn, and it will slice and cut up my apple all together really easy. So I can get through a big batch of apples pretty fast with this thing. You can probably find one at the hardware store or maybe online, but if you're just going to make a small batch, just go with this. Now, you don't have to peel your apple. You can actually leave your peels in if you want to. Like we don't spray our apples, but I know a lot of orchards might do that. So you're going to have to wash really, really well if you want to keep the peels in. But if you use an immersion blender afterwards, oh, the lights went out in here. You can get that to be really smooth, so it doesn't matter. But once you get the apples to be really soft, you're going to mash it up and use an immersion blender. And once it's really, really thick, you want to transfer thank you. You want to transfer everything to a crock pot at this point, just because it's so easy to burn it when it's on the stove at this point when it gets thick. So it's going to go from applesauce to apple butter. It's going to take a while. So when you put it in a crock pot, I'm going to suggest that you leave the cover off a little bit to let some of the steam escape. And you're going to stir it every now and then, like every maybe 15 minutes. Go and stir it. Leave the lid ajar a little bit. But it's going to take all day. So that's why I suggest using a crock pot. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to do much. If you don't have a crock pot, you can do this in your oven. If you do it on your stovetop, you're going to have to be diligent about stirring it a lot and keeping the heat down low so that it doesn't stick and burn on the bottom. Once you get to the applesauce stage, you can add in your other ingredients, which is going to be the pure maple syrup and what's called pumpkin spice. I have this. I can't grab it. Here we go. It's just typical pumpkin spice that you can buy at the store. And usually what's in pumpkin spice is cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, and ginger. So if you can't find the pumpkin spice, you can mix up those. Usually everybody has a little bit of that in their cabinet. You're going to put in what you like for taste. Start with 1 tablespoon. And then if you like it a little spicier, you can put in 2 or even 3. As far as the maple syrup goes, once you get to the applesauce stage and you pureed it or mashed it up, you're going to put in at least 1 cup of maple syrup. I use a lot more. I probably use at least 3 cups per 5 pounds of syrup, 5 pounds of apples. But it's up to you how much sweetness you want. Because most of our syrup is medium. It doesn't really matter what amber syrup you use. We do have some grade B syrup at our sugar house. That has more of a molassesy, caramelized type flavor. So it's a stronger flavor. That's why grade B, which isn't even called grade B anymore, it's called very robust. A lot of people like to use that because the maple flavor doesn't get overwhelmed, and you can taste that kind of a caramely molassesy type flavor of maple syrup. But I actually prefer lighter colored syrup. So I like it that we mostly make medium amber syrup. It's really good for just about anything under the sun. But then once you get it really thick, you can either put it in little canning jars like this, and you can follow the directions for canning, which is usually trying to simplify it, is you need to have a hot water bath canner and the jars that have the lids with the seals, and you have to put the apple butter in while it's really hot, and you need to get the air bubbles out with one of those skinny little spatulas and go around the whole inside of the jar and get all of the air bubbles out. And you leave a little bit of headspace. You wipe the rims of the glass, and then you put a hot lid and ring on, and then you're going to put it back in the water bath and process. These are half pints or 8 ounces. You're going to process about 10 minutes on boiling, and then take them out to cool, and they should seal. This is actually a little jar of pumpkin butter, which I'm going to go over with you in a minute. But if you don't want to go through the whole process of canning your apple butter, it's perfectly fine to put it all in your refrigerator, and or you can freeze it. That's an easier way to maybe store it if you don't want to do the whole water bath thing like that. But here's a way to test if your apple butter is done. Take a dollop and put it on a plate and let it sit there for a couple of minutes and look and see if there's any water forming around the puddle. If you see a lot of water coming out of that dollop that you put on the plate, it's probably not done enough. So you want to get to the point where you're not seeing a bunch of water pool up around that dollop, and then you know it's thick enough to call it done. So did anybody have any questions about how to make apple butter? Yeah.
Holly has a question, actually.
Yeah.
So in preparation for your program, I did grab a book out of the library. How novel, here with the being at the library. And one of the things that caught my eye, and I was just wondering if you had any experience with this, it mentioned that the author was mentioning that when she adds maple syrup to her recipes and then she goes and cans things,
Mhm.
she's always careful with the acidity because
Mhm.
apparently maple syrup is not as acidic, and when you're canning you need to have, you know, that acidity level in there. So she said she puts a little bit more lemon juice in the bottom
Yeah.
of her jars, and I didn't know if you had any comment. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I also wondered if you had any experience or comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, apples, usually tart apples are acidic enough for you to not worry about that with canning apple butter. And of course, we can our maple syrup,
Mhm.
all just pure maple syrup. There's nothing, we do not add lemon juice or citric
Yeah.
acid. We don't have to change the pH of our maple syrup when we can it. In fact, maple syrup is canned at least 180 degrees. It's, you know, we get it out of the evaporator boiling, and then it goes into these special jugs that vacuum seal so that when it cools down, it has a suction and it vacuum seals. And that's kind of like what happens when you're canning in these little canning jars. It vacuum seal.
Mhm.
So between being able to can maple syrup as is pure maple syrup and there's no spoilage happening. I mean, it's almost pure sugar, so it's not, there's no like botulism issue. And and apples, especially if you use something like Max, if you're throwing, I'm going to suggest that you mix the varieties and get some of those sour ones in there, like the Max and
Mhm.
the Granny
Granny
Smith.
Smith.
Those are sour enough that their acidic level is going to be fine for making and canning apple butter. If you use something like this is a ginger gold or um, you know, the delicious kind, um, you can go ahead and add a little bit of lemon juice to your recipe. Um, I'm not gonna, you know, tell you to put some lemon juice by itself in the jar. I mean, you want it to be nice and thick when you put it in,
Mhm.
but there are approved recipes for canning with apple butter, and because the apples are plenty acidic. Now, when it comes to pumpkin butter, that's a whole other issue because that's not acidic. Pumpkins don't have the right pH. You can can pumpkins in chunks, but I mean, pumpkin butter is something that people used to can all the time, and you can still find it at the store canned, but it's not water bath canned. You would need to have special equipment to do the pressure canning, and even a home pressure canner supposedly isn't enough for the pumpkin butter. So if you make pumpkin butter, you're going to need to put it in your refrigerator or in your freezer. But
And
with
eat
the
it right.
apple,
Yeah, eat it right away.
yeah, the apple butter you can, and it certainly freeze as well. But I mean, the recipe that I gave you is a small enough batch that you could just probably keep it in your refrigerator,
Mhm.
um, and you know, use it. I always say like 3 weeks just to be safe, but honestly, it can last longer. It is acidic enough to not worry about that.
Mhm.
So the worst thing that can happen with jams and jellies sometimes if you have them hanging around in your fridge for a really long time is, you know, it can form some mold on the top. So I would say you would discard it at that point. But you know, if you make a big batch, go ahead and freeze some of it if you don't want to deal with the canning part of it. But yeah, thanks for asking that.
Well, you're
So
welcome. Does anybody else have any questions while we've kind of uh, bumped into Susan's rhythm here in the presentation? But
that's okay.
if the folks do,
Um,
they can unmute. But I'll go away now.
but thanks. Yeah. So apple butter can be used like, oh, what am I going to use that for? Oh, right. Here you go. Put it on your hot cereal. Put it on your toast, waffles, bagels, biscuits, English muffins, your ice cream. Warm some up and put it on your ice cream. If you are a tea drinker, some hot tea, but you don't want to put it in with cream or milk because the acidic level will kind of curdle your milk. But it's really great with a little bit of tea. put a little bit in your hot tea that doesn't have cream or milk in it. So apple butter is awesome for the flavor of fall. It's actually good for like in between a couple of layers of cake on your, like if you like to make quick breads, it's really good as the topping, or like instead of a frosting or something like that. So I'm going to be making some apple butter soon and canning it and selling it, and it will be maple apple butter with our maple syrup instead of using cane sugar. So hopefully I'm going to get some of that done. I did make some recently made a few different kinds of jams and jellies. We got through tomato season, and I made a maple tomato jam. And that's really good for more of a condiment. It's not something you would put on a PBJ or anything like that, but it would be great on a burger or BLT or something like that. And I used maple syrup instead of cane sugar to sweeten the tomato jam. So that's a little, and I actually made maple ketchup this year for the first time. My kids, I don't know about your household, but my kids go through a ton of ketchup. And I know ketchup is not that expensive in the store. You know, you can buy a big bottle for a few dollars, but if you read, their primary ingredient after tomatoes is corn syrup. And it's a lot of times it's high fructose corn syrup. So if you want to have something really natural, you can make your own maple ketchup. And I did put the recipe for that on our Facebook page. So if you want to go back and find that recipe. But I used our own homegrown tomatoes and our own maple syrup, of course, and just some, you know, typical spices with vinegar. And because it uses vinegar and tomatoes are acidic as well, it's a cannable, you know, thing that's shelf stable and safe to can, especially when a recipe has vinegar in it. So ketchup has, you know, vinegar. I used apple cider vinegar, and it came out really good. So we're going to be eating that for our ketchup this year instead of the typical stuff that you buy at the store. So I was going to go over how to make pumpkin butter now. So we grow pumpkins at our farm, and we grow all kinds of pumpkins, from these little tiny mini ones that use for decorations to the big ones that you like to put out on your step or make a jack-o'-lantern out of. We have some really big ones this year too. And despite the drought that we had this past summer, we did end up with a pretty good pumpkin crop. As a matter of fact, we grew our pumpkins in a couple of areas that are typically too wet at our farm. If we get a rainy season, it's really muddy out there. But because we kind of had a drought, the pumpkins did pretty good in those spots. So we ended up with a pretty good pumpkin crop. So a sugar pumpkin are the ones that are smaller, like this size. And I have a couple more here. So when you go to the store or you come to our farm, you're going to be looking for the ones that are about a bowling ball size, maybe a little smaller. Some of them, here's a smaller one I have. The reason why they're called sugar pumpkins is because the flesh does have a higher sugar content than maybe some other types of pumpkins. So these are the ones that are typically used for cooking and making things like pumpkin pie, mashed pumpkin, pumpkin bread, all that kind of stuff. And I always like to make pumpkin butter every year. And it's kind of like, it tastes like the insides of a pumpkin pie without the crust. So you want to get a smaller pumpkin that's called a pie pumpkin. And to easily cook it, just cut it in half. You're going to scoop out the inside seeds and all that stringy flesh that's on the inside where the seeds are. And the seeds are edible, so you can rinse out all of those stringy parts around the seeds and pat them dry. Coat the seeds with a little bit of oil and salt and put it in your oven on about 325 for maybe a half hour, and toss them a couple of times and let them dry. And then you want to eat them soon after they come out of the oven when they're toasty, warm, and crunchy. And they make a really great snack to eat the pumpkin seeds. So to cook the pumpkin, what I usually do, because I do a big batch all at once instead of just doing one at a time, but you can put it in your oven or in your microwave, and you want to cook it until the flesh is really soft. So you can poke it with a fork, and you're going to see it's really soft and squishy, kind of like when you're making a batch of mashed potatoes and you go to see if the potatoes seem done like poking it with a fork and see if they're soft and squishy. And they say, yeah, it looks pretty done. But I usually just put them in the oven. I actually put a little bit of water in the cavity so that they kind of steam themselves as well. Um, Again, I don't always time every little thing that I do. I just kind of like look at it and see if it looks done. So it's going to take at least an hour probably in your oven on like 325, or in your microwave, it'll be a little faster. But you want to wait until it cools down. You don't want to try to touch them when they're super hot. Let them cool down. Bring them out of the oven or the microwave. Let it cool down completely. And then you want to peel off all of the skin. Usually it peels off pretty easy. If it's not peeling off easily, your pumpkin probably isn't cooked enough. So if it is cooked enough, the skin peels off pretty easily. And then you could use a potato masher or a fork or anything like that to mash them up like mashed potatoes. And you're going to add your maple syrup and again, some pumpkin pie spice. And because pumpkin flesh is a lot drier than like your applesauce, apple butter, I'm going to suggest that you put it right in a crock pot from the get-go and not put it in a sauce pot on your stove, because it's so thick. It's very easy for it to get stuck to the bottom and start burning on you. So go right to the crock pot with it. Use an immersion blender to get it really smooth. If you don't have an immersion blender, you can use like a mixer, one of the electric mixer beater bars to get it really nice and smooth. But just watch out, it's going to be really hot for you. I don't recommend using a blender unless you have something like a Vitamix blender to get it really smooth. I usually just use my immersion blender. I did not bring one. I think you know what that means, like one of those stick blenders that you just insert into the pot and go around with it and try to get it really nice and smooth. So again, pumpkin butter takes a really long time, just like the apple butter. It's going to take probably a good 8 hours in your crock pot on low before it's thick enough. Again, do the plate test. I call it the plate test, where you take a dollop, put it on a plate, let it sit there for a few minutes. And if it looks like water is puddling up around that dollop, it's probably not done enough. It has too much water in it. So pumpkin butter is now deemed, it didn't used to be this way, but it is now deemed to be unsafe for water bath canning. So I'm going to recommend that if you make a pumpkin butter batch, you're going to put it right in your fridge. And if it's too much for you to eat soon, go ahead and put it in your freezer. But the pumpkin butter is really great on your toast. Again, toast, waffles, bagels, biscuits. Use it as a frosting on a quick bread. Use it as a frosting in between your cake layers. It tastes just like the pumpkin pie without the crust. So we eat this, well, you think about it in the fall, but honestly, you could use this, of course, year round, but everybody thinks about pumpkin and pumpkin spice in the fall. But if you take a little spoonful of it and put it in your coffee, you've got your pumpkin spice coffee or your tea. I think it's really good in tea, actually. So does anybody have any questions about how to make pumpkin butter? I can't hear how more. Oh,
I was just going to ask, when you make the maple ketchup, do you use a lighter maple syrup then, or to do that to take kind of away from the mapley taste of the ketchup, or how do you do that?
I used medium amber when I made my maple ketchup because, like I said, that's mostly what I have. I personally, like, a lot of people love grade B or the really dark maple syrup. A lot of people love it. It's kind of like that molasses-y caramel flavor. You can use any grade of maple syrup, and any of the recipes that I post that uses maple syrup, you can use any grade that you want to, because it's all going to be the same consistency. It's all the same density. It's all like the same thickness. It's just a different bit of a flavor tone. So if you like that flavor of a darker colored syrup, I definitely use a darker colored syrup then. For me, it's just that most of what we have is medium. I do use some grade B when I do baked bean kits. I do have the recipe for that. on our website as well, because the darker colored syrup gives a nice flavor to baked beans. So I have that recipe on our website as well. So you think of baked beans, a lot of people use molasses and brown sugar. So that is eliminated in my recipe, and instead use grade B or dark amber syrup, and it has that nice like molasses caramel type flavor. But for the ketchup I did medium. But again, it doesn't really matter what grade of syrup you use in any of the recipes. They're all interchangeable. So it's usually with lighter colored syrups, that flavor of maple ends up getting kind of lost. It just ends up tasting sweet. And whereas the darker, as you get a darker, more stronger flavor, you can taste the maple in the end. So, and one thing I was going to mention about pumpkins is, technically you can use any kind of pumpkin to do pumpkin butter. But the larger pumpkins tend to be waterier, and also the flesh is very stringy. And the sugar pie pumpkins are sweet from the get-go, and they have a different texture and a different consistency. So I would stick with using the small pie pumpkins. But if all you have is a kid's jack-o'-lantern, you can go ahead and use that one. It'll make pumpkin butter. So
Thank you.
anyway, yeah. Any other questions? So I guess I'll move on to talk about my next thing was about how we grow popcorn on our farm. And I brought some popcorn that we grew to show you. And last year was the first time that we ever grew popcorn. And you can grow popcorn anywhere that regular sweet corn can be grown. It does take about 100 days from the time that the seed germinates till it's ready to harvest. So it does take all summer. It's kind of like the pumpkins. Pumpkins actually, that's why you think of pumpkins in the fall, right? Because you plant them in the spring. They take all summer to grow, and they don't even turn ripe until it's fall. So that's why we think of pumpkins as being a fall crop, and popcorn is as well. It's a fall crop. So we have a little stand of popcorn on our farm that's ready to harvest. I did pick a little bit of it, but usually you wait until the whole corn stalk has turned brown and the popcorn is turned brown and it's not growing anymore. And you pick it just like sweet corn, and then you pull back the husks and you let it dry. The corn is actually really hard right from the get-go. It's like Indian corn. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but you could actually pop Indian corn, the colored kind of corn that we all call it Indian corn. It's all different colors, and you use it for decoration on your door. That's actually poppable. But there's certain varieties that are grown specifically for edible popcorn, and this is one of them. It's usually yellow. There's yellow popcorn, there's white popcorn. This is a yellow type. And right from the get-go, these kernels feel like super hard. So it's not anything that you could pick a corn and try to eat it. You'd break your teeth. And thankfully, we don't get a whole lot of animals trying to eat our popcorn because it's not sweet and it's not soft. So that's kind of a plus for us growing popcorn. We kind of gave up on growing sweet corn a lot of times because between the crows coming to eat it first, and then you get the tipworms if you don't spray, and then you get the raccoons trying to eat it all. It just seems like a losing proposition. So one year I just said, hey, let's try growing some popcorn instead. And it was a great success, and we had so much fun with it. So we picked it last year. We picked it like November, and we bought a sheller, a little gizmo that takes all these kernels off the cob. And I brought some popcorn kernels here that we were selling it this past year. So it kind of looks just like the popcorn that you can buy in the store, but hey, we grew it. And we don't spray. We don't spray any kind of chemicals, and we don't use any kind of chemical fertilizer at all. So it's, to me, it's a good wholesome snack. So it takes a while to dry the kernels. So the new crop is not ready to pop yet. It's going to have to take a couple of months before it's dry enough. And you have to get it to be the right, just right moisture content for it to pop well. So if it's too dry, the popcorn kernels are really hard. And if it's too wet, they won't pop at all. So you have to get it just right. So that's something we're still learning about, but we still have a little bit left from last year that's perfectly poppable. We're still popping it all the time. We have popcorn all the time now at home because we have a pile of it. And so we're going to probably pick the stalks, pick all the cobs rather, husk them back and let them dry in our greenhouse for a while. And then we're going to use our sheller machine, which basically you throw the cob in and this little thing with little teeth spins around and it takes all the kernels off the cob in a jiff, because otherwise you'd have to do it all by hand, which is the way people used to do it. They would just take a cob and twist, twist, twist. If it was dry enough, the kernels can come off pretty easily. If they don't come off easily, it probably means they're not dry enough yet. So that's a little bit of trick that we're learning, is like waiting to the right moment where it's dry enough so that the kernels are going to pop off pretty easily. So with popcorn, I don't really know the history behind it. I mean, I think it is a Native American crop, and I'm not really sure. I did not look into the history of popcorn, but it's, of course, that's like a really, really popular snack. And, you know, you don't think about going to the movies. Of course, with COVID, the movie theaters aren't all open anymore, but you know, the first thing you think about when you go to the movies is, oh, I'm going to go get some popcorn. So whenever we sit down and watch a movie, we're going to make a batch of popcorn at our house. So I have this special popper. It's a whirly pop. It's a stovetop popper, and those work really good for these kernels. It uses a little bit of oil and on your stove pop, and it pops right up. You can probably do it in your microwave as well. Like you can get a special popcorn popper. But I was going to share with you, because I guess today is National Dessert Day, right? I was going to share with you a recipe for how to make a maple caramel coated popcorn. I didn't bring the recipe in front of me, so now I'm trying to do it from memory. But basically, you're going to take, you're going to pop your popcorn ahead of time. And I guessed and said about 8 cups of popped popcorn. Usually what I do is take 3 tablespoons of oil. You can use any kind of oil, even olive oil will work, in the stovetop. And then I use about 3/4 of a cup of the popcorn kernels and get it all popped up. You can do it in your microwave as well. And then just put it in a big bowl or a big pan and have it waiting, ready for the next step. So you can use any grade of maple syrup for this, but I'm going to recommend, you know, grade A. Don't go with the grade B, because grade B syrup, when you cook it thicker, it can actually, I don't know, I personally just don't like the flavor of it. So I'm going to say stick with a grade A maple syrup. And you're going to need a candy thermometer for this recipe. So I did bring, hold on just a second, because I got to grab the thermometer and show it to you.
While you're doing that, Susan, I just wanted to let you know that I have your recipe. So if you have any questions, I have your website pulled up. So if you're doing fine though. So
yeah, I forgot to print them so that I had it in front of me, and I'm like, ooh, now I have to try to remember it. So you're going to need a candy thermometer for this recipe. You can find them at Target, Walmart, you know, online. The hardware store probably has it with their canning accessories, maybe. This is a typical one that you can buy at the store. I usually use this one though. I just like it way better. It's a digital one. Has a probe and it's battery operated, and it can go up really high to what's called candy stage. Like when you're making candy, what's called soft ball, hard ball, soft crack, hard crack. It can go way up there in temperature. Whereas a lot of times these candy thermometers that you might buy at the store, it depends. You'll have to take a look how high the temperature can go. I think you can actually get these even at like Michael's because they sell candy making supplies. So there's a lot of different places you can buy these locally. So you want to put your maple syrup in a heavy bottom sauce pot. Again, don't use a thin walled pot on the bottom because maple syrup can burn very easily. And I'm also going to warn you, when you boil maple syrup, at first it boils up like lava. And if you don't have a high walled pot, you might have a big mess on your hands. So just watch it. Usually, put a little bit of butter in the pot to keep the foaming down. And as soon as it comes to a boil, turn that heat down so that you're just keeping it on a very low boil, because maple syrup, you have to watch it. It just can bubble up and like lava, make a big mess all over your stove. So use a big enough pot for this, okay? And you're going to boil to about 240 degrees, which is what we do for making maple sugar candies. And it uses some butter. I think the recipe said a stick of butter, half stick of butter, because it's basically, you're making like a caramel coating. And as soon as you get to that stage, you can then start pouring it over your popcorn in thin strands. It's going to be super hot, so you need to watch what you're doing. Wear an oven mitt, etc. Thin strands over your popcorn, and then toss your popcorn. And once it's cooled down, it'll be ready to eat. So it's a little bit like Cracker Jacks. I don't know if any of you remember Cracker Jacks. I think you can still get Cracker Jacks at the store, but I haven't seen them in ages and eons. But Cracker Jacks is a caramel coated popcorn, and it usually has peanuts in it. So go ahead and put some peanuts in there, or pecans if you can do those. Those are yummy too. If you use a lot of the syrup topping ratio to popcorn, you can actually make popcorn balls too, where you would have to have more of the syrup so that there's enough of it. You're going to butter your hands and squish all the popcorn together until you make some popcorn balls. Those are really good too. So did you have any questions about growing popcorn or any other questions about anything?
I always have tons of questions.
Okay, great.
I love food. I love to eat, and I like to putter around in the kitchen. So I appreciate that you shared the popcorn recipe. And I was going to ask, can you make these into the popcorn balls? Because
Yeah.
I haven't done those in ages. But
Yeah.
it sounds great. So I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but I see also that you have a maple barbecue sauce recipe up on the website.
So if you go to our website, www.sweetwindfarm.net, I have a special page just for recipes. Well, it says our products and our recipes. So the recipe part is going to be, go scroll down. And I put out a bunch of different recipes that use maple syrup as a sweetener. And of course, because I feel like we have an unlimited supply. I'm always using maple syrup in everything under the sun. I use maple syrup like making a salmon dish. You can sprinkle a little bit on. I make maple lemonade all the time. We use it in our smoothies. I make homemade yogurt, and I use maple syrup, and I actually make granola. I sell maple granola, but my recipe is on our website too if you just want to make your own. So if you make a parfait with yogurt, maple syrup, and the maple granola, that's really yummy. So I just use it for all kinds of things. So the maple barbecue sauce, I don't have the recipe in front of me, but yeah, basically a barbecue sauce is a little bit like a ketchup, but it has a little bit of different seasonings in there. So I made the maple ketchup this year for the first time, just because I think we eat more ketchup at our house than barbecue sauce. My husband loves barbecue sauce, but I don't like it on everything under the sun. He'll want to put barbecue sauce on all kinds of stuff, and the kids wrinkle their nose at that, but they'll eat ketchup with their with
Yeah.
their chicken nuggets or whatever. So I have a lot of maple ketchup in the cabinet for this year.
Well, I think all these recipes on the website are really easy to follow. They're well written up. So I've been listening to you and scanning the website throughout the program. And I also noticed that you have something, a farm box share. Is that part of the virtual farmers market that you participate in with the Granby
Yes.
Agricultural Commission?
So the Granby Virtual Farmers Market was new this year, and it sprung up in response to COVID, because initially when there was a lot of lockdowns, shutdowns, et cetera, and people couldn't get out of their homes to go shopping. I mean, it was just everything that was going on. It was I'm not really sure who thought of the idea at first, but we jumped on board with the Granby Ag to be one of the providers or one of the vendors for the Granby Virtual Farmers Market. It still is up and running. Right now, because it's at the end of growing season, we've actually discontinued our farm box offerings for this season. We'll start up again next year, because we did have an early frost in September, and then we had this really bad dry spot. I mean, thankfully we got some rain again, but we were getting kind of into a drought situation again. So there isn't a whole lot left in our garden right now. Like right now we have Swiss chard, kale, some herbs like parsley. We have our popcorn to pick. I actually do have some flowers left that didn't freeze when we had that little bit of touch of frost, but there's not a whole lot left in our garden right now. So we discontinued the farm box. But what that was we would take, it was kind of like a CSA. If any of you ever heard of CSA, that stands for Community Supported Agriculture. But really what it is you pay for a share of what the farm produces, and you pay upfront, and in exchange for it's almost like buying a membership or a share in the farm. In exchange, you get every week a weekly allotment of what the farm produces. So we switched it up a little bit, and instead of charging our customers upfront for the whole season, we did it week by week, and I would say what it was going to be this week. This is what your farm box is going to include this week. So that way it gave people the choice of whether they wanted to, participate or not and get it. But it was at a discount compared to if you just came to the farm stand or one of the farmers markets that we do. So you would get like a package deal. So for example, for $20, you could have got, like a sugar pumpkin, a large pumpkin, a jar of maple butter, and some of our garden produce that maybe if you bought separately, it would have been a $35 purchase, but instead if you buy it as a package deal farm box, you got it for $20. Now with the Granby Virtual Farmers Market, we still are up and running, so you can go to that website. You can either find it through our website, sweetwindfarm.net, or through the Granby Ag, which is Granby Ag. I think it's granbyag.org. They have a link to the virtual market as well. And there's a few other farms in town that are on board with that. And I list them on our website as well as the Granby Ag. So you can order from any of the farms all at the same time and then just get one delivery. So you would pay a $5 delivery fee to the person who does the driving. And you can order from all the farms all at once, but still only have to pay a delivery fee once. And you get it actually delivered to your house. So that's the cool part. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to come up to our farm to pick up a CSA share. You can get it delivered to your house. So, but we're still doing that with our maple products and like some of our other specialty foods. So you can still do that.
Okay. Well, thank you. That spells out spells that out. I mean, I know the growing season's coming to an end, but
yeah,
it's there's still things out there. There's still produce out there and canned goods and everything else. So I think we're fortunate to live in this this community. We have a lot of opportunities. And does anybody have any other questions for Susan while we have her here in person tonight? Because if you do, now's the time to ask. And if there's nothing coming up from the from the peanut gallery here. I'm just going to go on to say a heartfelt thank you, Susan, for you to spend your evening with us explaining a lot of these recipes and a lot of what you do at Sweet Wind Farm. I think, again, it's just a wonderful opportunity that people in this area have to visit our farms and have really quality grown foods that maybe others aren't as fortunate to have.
Yeah, I was just going to mention too that we do have an outdoor farmers market at our farm on Saturdays, and we'll be having them for the remaining Saturdays in October. So we're at 339 South Road, which is also Route 179, from 10 to 4 outdoors in front of the sugar house. And like I said, we have a lot of pumpkins, we have some apples, we have a lot of our specialty foods and maple products, and a few, other produce things like winter squash, etc. So come on up if you're looking for a drive and you want to check out all the maple leaves this time of year.
The fall foliage is
Yeah.
beautiful. It's really beautiful. And it's nice if we can have a little treat when we get to our destination, so we can find something to buy and eat while we're up there with some maple candy and whatnot. And I also want to make another quick shout out to the folks that are listening tonight, that if you're interested in learning more about local farms or farming in general, or land management, we are continuing our Granby Grows program series. We're continuing it virtually for now, and I guess just stay tuned, because we try to bring something every month. Sometimes we have more than one program a month. And I want to put a plug in for next week, when we are hosting a 4-person panel for farms, food farms and forward thinking. It's a 4-person panel made up of experts from American Farmland Trust, Connecticut Working Lands Alliance, and the Connecticut Resource and Development Commission. These folks have a lot to say about farming in not just in Granby, but also in Connecticut and New England. And I'm impressed with the caliber of speakers that we have and the knowledge that they have about this area. So they've brought some special data mapping tools too about farming in our area, and about food production in New England. I don't know if I've made that sound interesting enough, but it actually is very fascinating. And some of our other Granby Ag Commission members and Granby Land Trust members, and just folks that are interested in farming and produce and all of land management and that those topics, and the environment and the impact. I think they'll be really interested in that subject matter. So that was a plug for next week, the 21st. If you're interested, just visit the Granby Public Library's website and register for the program under the calendar events tab, and then you will get the Zoom program link. As with most of our online programs now, that's kind of how we're running all of that. Again, Susan, thank you. Thank you, Arlo. Thank you for being a part of this series and sharing all your tips for some really tasty fall eats, I guess is what we want to call them. I wish you were here. I wish we could all be together, because it's always nice to be able to sample treats, but I think we can all get in our cars and find Sweet Wind Farm this weekend. After the next rainstorm passes, I think it'll be nice to take a little trip out and about into those lower Berkshires. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Susan.
All right.
All righty. And we'll that.